John.
Kaleigh, what does the president believe is illegal about the Secretary of State of Michigan setting up absentee ballot applications, and what federal funding is he considering withholding from the state of Michigan as a result?
So, I won't get into exactly what the funding considerations are. I would note that his tweets were meant to alert Secretary Mnuchin and Mr. Vogt about, head of OMB, about his concerns with trillions of dollars going to these states, and his noted concerns about a lot of fraud that is potentially at play when you have mass mail-in voting. So with regard to the illegality and legality of it, that's a question for the campaign as to their voting and ballot practices, but I would just note that his tweet was meant to alert OMB. He wanted to be very careful as we send trillions of dollars to states that we keep this important point in mind and we ensure that there's fairness in our voting system and absolute accuracy.
But the president himself has voted just 2 months ago by a mail-in ballot. There are several Republican states that are also doing these mail-in applications for ballots. And so I'm confused. What is it that he thinks is illegal that's happening in Michigan? He doesn't really specify.
So first, with regard to the president doing a mail-in vote, the president is, after all, the president, which means he's here in Washington. He's unable to cast his vote down in Florida, his state of residence. So for him, that's why he had to do a mail-in vote. But he supports mail-in voting for a reason. When you have a reason that you are unable to be present, right now, we're very far from November 3rd. I'm glad that you have the prediction tool and you can tell us what will be happening on November 3rd, 2020. I certainly don't, nor does the president.
Primaries coming up, and that's like what's happening in Nevada.
I assume you care about fairness and accuracy in our elections, do you not?
Of course I do. There's not evidence that there is widespread voter fraud.
There's evidence. You can go look this up on ProPublica. There is a bipartisan consensus on the fact that mass mail-in voting can lead to fraud. There was a 2005 commission by none other than President Carter, who's not a member of the Republican Party, and also James Baker about this, concluding that these ballots, quote, remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. So this is a concern. The president's right to look at this. We want a free and fair election, and that's his concern. Yes, Steve?
Kaleigh, on this subject and one other on different one, the president deleted his first tweet, which alleged falsehood that the state of Michigan was sending out absentee ballots to every voter. In fact, they sent out absentee ballot requests. Was the president misinformed this morning? And why is he only directing this message toward Michigan, not other states like Georgia and others that are sending similar absentee ballot requests to their citizens?
So the president corrected his tweet, as you noted, and with regard to going state by state and looking at ballots and the way they're distributed, that would be a question for the Trump campaign, and I'd refer you to the campaign on that point.
On the G7, did you have any more details on the timing when the president would like to schedule that here in Washington? And does that mean that travel restrictions that are currently in place on travel from Europe, from China, and other places would potentially be relaxed before that meeting would take place here?
So I won't get into the mechanics of how that would happen. I would note that the president really wants to see the G7 happen here in Washington as we begin not just to reopen the country, but as the world begins to reopen. He'd like to see it happen sometime in June, but as to a particular date, I don't have any announcement on that front or to the mechanisms of how we'd make that work.
Yes. Thanks, Kaleigh. A couple of questions for you. One, does President Trump support the CDC guidelines that were released over the weekend? And if so, why were they released so quietly? Why not talk about them, roll them out here from the podium?
So the CDC guidelines, there was a 60-page document that came out last night that I assume you're referencing. That document, I talked to Dr. Redfield earlier today about it, and much of that was already out there. So Appendixes A, B, C, and D have been out there for a while. Appendix E, he said he thinks got posted sometime late last week. And again, these were his rough estimates he was giving me. Appendix F was being discussed, and there was constructive criticism of it through the task force and the interagency process. So that was refined. And my point in sharing that with you is that the 60-page document was merely an aggregation of a lot of what was already out there. So it's not as if this was new information that we were announcing, but it was more guidance pursuant to our Reopening of America guidance that was issued several weeks ago.
President support the guidelines? Does he think Americans should follow those guidelines, or should they be following the initial guidelines that rolled out here from the
So the president's been very clear. He supports the reopening of America guidelines. The CDC guidelines are in concert with those guidelines. He wants to safely reopen this country. It's very important we do so, and it's good to see that most states, I think basically all of them, have plans at this point to reopen, and we're starting to see the safe reopening of several states and Americans getting back to work.
Let me just get your reaction to something. We just got moments ago a statement from the American Nurses Association which says, quote, "The American Nurses Association has not received reports from nurses or other frontline healthcare workers utilizing hydroxychloroquine as a preventative treatment for COVID-19. Why does the president continue to say that many or thousands of frontline workers are using it as a prophylactic?
Well, there is at Henry Ford Hospital is doing a study on this now, where 3,000 frontline workers will be taking hydroxychloroquine to look at its use as a prophylaxis. I believe there's a few hundred or 190 workers in Tampa General Hospital. So this is being used by some. And one thing I want to note with regard to hydroxychloroquine, because I think it's very important that we're as accurate as we can be with our reporting on this. Hydroxychloroquine has been a drug that has been in use for 65 years for lupus, arthritis, and malaria. It has a very good safety profile, but as with any drug and as with any prescription, it should be given by a doctor to a patient in that context. So no one should be taking this without a prescription from their doctor. But that being said, I've seen a lot of apoplectic coverage of hydroxychloroquine. You had Jimmy Kimmel saying the president's, quote, trying to kill himself by taking it. You had Joe Scarborough saying, quote, "This will kill you." Neil Cavuto saying, "What have you got to lose? One thing you have to lose are lives." And you had Chris Cuomo saying the president knows that hydroxychloroquine is not supported by science. He knows it has been flagged by his own people, and he's using it. Well, Cuomo mocked the president for this. And interestingly, I found this out just before coming here. Hydroxychloroquine, of course, is an FDA-approved medication with a long proven track record for safety. And it turns out that Chris Cuomo took a less safe version of it called quinine, which the FDA removed from the market in 2006 because of its serious side effects, including death. So really interesting to have that criticism of the president. And on that note to Chris Cuomo, I'd like to redirect him to his brother, the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, who has several on-the-record statements about hydroxychloroquine, saying, "I'm an optimist, I'm hopeful about the drug, and that's why we'll try it here in New York as soon as we get it. There has been anecdotal evidence that it's promising, that's why we're going ahead." And I have about 8 other quotes from Governor Cuomo, should any of you have interest in that.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And just for the record, you were watching a White House press secretary press conference with Kaleigh McEnany. And as you can tell, as you can notice right away, that Miss McEnany, she practically commands the respect of what appears to be students of journalism. Now here, she seems to be very consistent with her energy, as well as she's prepared. She debunks projection into the president's use of words, or the projection of deviance or irresponsibility, whether it was related to the topic of hydroxychloroquine. Believe it or not, that debate is still going on, and she basically is offering, she's not only is she prepared, she's giving the press credible sources and referring them back to these sources. So there's a huge swath of education, as well as she holds this press accountable for the rhetoric that they tend to inject into these questions and the tone of the president. She also challenges them to do their homework. If you're concerned about, if you have questions about mail fraud or voter fraud, there are actually studies on this particular subject. She even cites these studies in these cases, and she actually gives legitimacy to the president's concerns. And she also, she questions them, saying, "Hey, are you not concerned about integrity and transparency in our democratic process?" I mean, these are, she is very direct, and her tactics are they're very effective in managing this bit of a Mr. and Mrs. Media, the rabidness that they tend to have during these press conferences. Not to mention, one of the things that she does best is she uses their words against them, which is a very powerful tactic. It's a very powerful tool, because I think, unfortunately, the left and the progressives and the pundits and the Cuomos, they don't think that they're actually going to be held accountable, or I guess that America is not paying attention, or they just think that they're going to be able to spout out whatever kind of rhetoric they want, and no one's ever going to say, hey, well, you did lend credit to the president, and you did appear optimistic in the initial planning and management of this pandemic. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And please, as always, let me know what your comments and your concerns are. And if you could like or unlike or share, or even better than that, if you could subscribe if you like what you've seen or if you like what you've heard here. And of course, I always encourage everyone to take a closer look and do your diligence in these times. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.